Hey guys, it's Ingrid here and welcome back to a new video. I am pre-filming this, but on the day you're watching it, it will be my 21st birthday, which, because I don't live in America, doesn't actually mean anything. I can already drink, I can already drive, not at the same time obviously, but all that fun adult stuff. But either way, I thought it would be fun to do a 21 bookish facts about me. So these are all different and don't really have any structure. I just sat down and thought of 21 things, so they're a bit jumping back and forth between a lot of things, but let's just get into it. Molly Moon was my first ever book series that I fangirled about. I read this when I was around 10-11 in Norwegian, and I loved it. It's the first book series I can remember crying about, and I still remember why I cried. I really want to reread this in English someday, and hopefully love it as much as I did when I was a kid. The second one is going to be kind of a controversial one, but I'm not a Harry Potter fan. I watched the movies when I was around 15 and they were okay. Didn't really get the whole hype about it, and then after I turned 20 I just kept hearing about the books here on booktube, and I thought, okay, this is going to be the year when I read it. So I read the first 4 books. The third one was really good, but the fourth one I really didn't like, and that's why I haven't continued. I do own the last 3 books, and hopefully I will get to them, but as of now I just don't get it. I write and highlight in the majority of my books. Like in the book 12 The Boys I Loved Before, you can obviously tell that I loved it, and I will just try and get to one of the pages where I've written some stuff. Not sure if you can see it. I have stuff underlined. Sometimes I draw on them, sometimes then I write in them. Here I just write ice cream is always the answer. In my head, if I paid money for a book, I should be able to enjoy it to the fullest, which for me is putting my thoughts into it and making this book kind of my own. In a way, so if you're borrowing a book from me, you get my thoughts as well. And I really like that, and I mean, it's my book, so I can do what I want. My favorite genre is fantasy, as you can probably tell on my shelves. My favorite book, however, is actually a contemporary, and I've talked about this so many times. It's Neverland by Margaret McGovern, and it's a YA contemporary about mental health, especially PTSD, and it has a little bit of Peter Pan sprinkled in there. And the reason why I don't have my copy is because I'm borrowing it out to a good friend, because I want everyone to read this book. I often cry when I read. I'm a very emotional person in general, and if I read something that's really cute, or that's really sad, or it makes me gives me all the feels, which most books does, I cry. So I almost never read when I have makeup on. Even though I'm Norwegian and my native language is Norwegian, I read almost exclusively in English. I think on my shelves right now there is no Norwegian books. I do have one Norwegian comic book, but other than that it's English, and that's because I would rather read a book in the language that is written, and because I understand English, I choose to read my books in English. I love using my library app, but I almost never go to the actual library. And this is because I own so many books, I would rather read my own physical books. But I love audiobooks, or if it's a book that I'm not sure about, I love reading the ebooks format. I judge a book by its cover. I don't really have a preference between hardcovers and paperbacks. I'll just buy whichever one has the prettiest cover. I read multiple books at once. I'm really good with starting books, not that great at finishing them. But if I'm not really feeling a book and I think it's because of my mood, then I'd rather put it away and pick it up at a later time. And I always like having an audiobook as well as a physical book, sometimes even more physical books, like one contemporary, one fantasy, and sometimes ebooks. So I'm not the kind of person that just sticks to a book, reads that, goes on to the next one. I have my mind just everywhere. I buy most of my books online, and the biggest reason for this is that there isn't a large English section at my local bookstores. So in order to get the books that I really want, I just buy them online and get them shipped to my door. I own around 70 unread books, but I'm trying to reduce that amount. So I'm actually on a book buying ban-ish. I say ish, it takes it real loosely, but I'm trying to only buy sequels if I've already read the first book and loved it, and not start any new series. But emphasis on the trying part. I always try and see myself in the characters. It doesn't necessarily have to be the main character, but every time I read a book, I'm always looking for things that I can relate to. When I annotate, I usually write, oh, that's what I agree with, or I don't agree with this. And I don't really understand why I do that, but I feel like it is a more fun experience that way. Sometimes I read out loud to myself. Usually it happens because the English is too advanced for me, and I find it easier to just read out loud. And I also do it if I feel like I'm gonna have an anxiety attack or panic attack, because it makes me focus on something and it makes me calm down hearing words and kind of hearing the story. I usually read late at night. It's very rare that I read before 8 o'clock at night. And I think the reason for that is because I'm so worked up during the day I can't really relax, so I'm using the books to make me wind down before bed. I'll have my book, a cup of chamomile tea, be in my pajamas, and that's kind of my treat for making it through the day. Especially if I have a really stressful day with a lot of schoolwork, that's kind of what keeps me going. I don't have a big desire to become an author. I know a lot of people on BookTube does, which is amazing, but for me, I've just never had the desire to write. I love telling stories, and I think I have a really good imagination, but I've just never had the desire to write it down and make pretty words, and that's just not really for me. The only people in my everyday life that knows about my channel is my boyfriend, my sister, and a really good friend. I'm not afraid to DNF books, but I usually give books many shots. So if it's a book I don't like, I usually just take a break from it, like Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I'm over halfway in it, I believe. I'm over 300 pages in, and I'm not loving it as much as people love it. So I'm going to put it aside, and I can still remember the story, which is really nice, and I will get back to it whenever I'm more in that kind of mood. So I've kind of DNF'd it, but maybe not, and that's usually how I go. If there's a few books back home at my parents' house that I didn't bring with me, that I read like 100, 200 pages off and not falling in love with, and then I've just left them there, and when I go home to see my parents, I'll pick those up again and see if there's any more interest, and if I do that a couple of times and I just can't get through it, then I just DNF it. The first series that I ever read in English was the Twilight Saga, and I'm not sure if I read the first book in Norwegian. I might have, but I believe my sister bought the rest of the series in English, and she read them, and so of course I wanted to read them so that we could talk about it, so that's what we did. I really want to get a bookish tattoo. I already have 2 tattoos, but none of them are really bookish, so I would love to get some type of bookish tattoo, even if it's Peter Pan or just books in general or something to do with fantasy. I'm not really sure, but one day I really hope to have a bookish tattoo. And for the last fact, I'm going to say that BookTube played a huge part in me getting back into reading. I've never really been away from reading. I used to read a book every month, every other month, and then I discovered BookTube around January of 2017, and I saw a lot of people's favorite books of 2016, and there were so many recommendations that I never heard of. I had never heard of the Percy Jackson series. I had never heard of Lee Bardugo. Basically any big authors like Cassandra Clare, Tahada Mafi, I hadn't heard of any of them. I would usually just go to a bookstore and I would just be like, oh, I'll choose this one. After I discovered that and I got so many recommendations, I would go to the library, because at this part of my life I used to live in Australia and my library was just a 5-minute walk away, so I used to borrow all my books from there. And I read the Grisha trilogy and I was so in love with everything bookish. It made my reading speed up. I started reading many books a month, and eventually I think I ended up reading around 50 books in 2017. I'm already at 50 books now in 2018, but of course I'm in college, so my reading is definitely slowed down. Alright guys, that was it for the 21 bookish facts about me. I really hope you enjoyed getting to know me a little bit better. If you liked this video, then give it a like. You can follow me on Goodreads and Twitter. And if you enjoy hearing me ramble on about books and bookish things, then hit the subscribe button, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye.